Okay, welcome everyone to this evening's fireside chat in the Spark Q4 series of fireside chats. This is our third in the series, with previously covering how to get legals right and also looking at the power of branding when you're raising investment. So tonight I am thrilled to have with me Jamie Snowdon, the CEO and Chief Researcher at Market Prescience. Jamie has over 25 years experience in the IT and business service industry, and his analyst career is focused on data analysis, including market size and forecast models, quantitative and qualitative survey analysis, and competitive analysis. So he is well positioned to help us look at tonight's topic, which is all around sizing your markets and how to make sure that the numbers that you put in front of investors are credible and not fantastical, which is what you want to avoid. So we've got a series of questions that I'm going to be asking Jamie. If you've got any questions that you would like to add, please just add them to the chat. I've got that open so I can ask Jamie those questions either as we go, and we'll also have an open chat session at the end of the session too, so you've got the opportunity to come off mute and ask any questions you might have then. So welcome Jamie, and let's get started.
Right.
Okay, so the first question, I guess, going straight in at the deep end is, what are the kind of key mistakes you think people tend to make when they're trying to size a market and come up with some figures that look credible to investors?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few mistakes that people make. I mean, and a lot of them are common to all sort of market research that people do. I suppose. So one of the biggest, when people are kind of pulling together the numbers and the data, is they're doing it without context. So I think, the numbers, they really need to be, I suppose, a distillation of your understanding of the marketplace that you're in or you're looking to enter. And the important thing is to demonstrate the understanding that you have for your market. And I think that's what investors and people are looking for. And that means what are the key structures of the market, how does it operate, and this helps if you're looking both to play in that particular game, so sort of go with the flow, or if you're trying to rewrite the rules and disrupt it. It's really important that you have that kind of that understanding, and it's really key to understanding what kind of sizing methods are open to you and what works best. So if it's a very consolidated market, then that has some implications. If it's a fragmented market, then then you would have to do things slightly differently, and it changes the way that you would approach certain types of sizing methodologies. And it also means that you have a better idea of all the data sources that are available to you, because I think one of the key things here is really about making sure that the data's there. And I think that's what people are looking for is which gets to some of the other kind of problems. I think another issue is, and I think market sizing is best done with perspective, and an analytical approach should be taken to it. And I think sometimes people put too much weight on preconceptions, or perhaps their existing kind of first wave of customers or friends and family, or essentially people who are bought in. And I think this can introduce bias into thinking. And an important checkpoint, I think, for when you're doing any of this kind of work, is to have someone independent to provide feedback on the numbers. I mean, frankly, it's good if you have someone else do them. I mean, that would be best. And obviously, I'm not going to put my sales hat on, but having someone else do it is good. But the numbers really should pass the sniff test of a third party, and you need to be able to clearly explain the methodology and what is behind the data. And in some ways, there's an argument for that means doing it yourself. But I think if you do use a third party, then obviously it's really important that you understand that methodology and you can explain it. But it also helps with the maths, because it's really easy to slip a decimal point and mix your billions with millions, and having that kind of feedback can be really useful. So naturally, my kind of experience of this is really as an industrial market researcher. So I was helping large organizations size their markets and do competitive analysis in their markets. But one of the key kind of groups that I worked with for, as part of my career, was for large institutional investors. And I just remember a conversation about with one of them about what they liked and disliked in a pitch. And I mean, he told me he had kind of 3 kind of pet peeves that he didn't like. And I personally, I think they boil down to 2 things. Frankly, the numbers were too general, or they're giving a sort of ridiculously non-specific sky-high market size. So making a series of kind of assumptions with no data to back the estimates up. The kind of, our market is 10% of a 10 billion market, and we'll capture 2% of that in 3 years, where it's a little bit too arbitrary, and people are not really sure, where it starts and where it kind of begins. And I think often an investor will be a lot happier if the number was smaller but real and had lots of data to back it up, and rather than have something that's kind of hastily pulled together and really doesn't reflect the market very well, and clearly demonstrates that you don't actually understand the space that you're in, or you're trying to be in. It's like I suppose the Del Boy Trotter kind of market size of bottled water. There are kind of 65 million people in the UK. They all need to drink 2 liters of bottle of water a day. So the market size for a bottle of water, if it was a pound, would be 2 times 365 times 65 million, where you get to a very tidy sort of 45-50 billion dollar market size. But that doesn't take into consideration all sorts of other things that you need to consider in terms of not that many people buy the bottled water and all those kind of things. So, I mean, by the way, that thought process can help in terms of framing, the maximum possible size of the market, but it's not, the market itself. And so, you need to think about the further assumptions about the number of people that buy bottled water and consumption levels if you're going to take that kind of approach. And really, that gets to sort of the other kind of pet peeve was poor definitions. And this goes back to kind of understanding the market, and it's really important that the market is well defined, both in terms of the category that you're looking at, but also the type of type of customer. So the type of consumer, the industries that you're targeting, and the industries being targeted should be well specified. So often you see a kind of you're using macro industry categories, and they kind of always hide a sort of multitude of sins. So it's really about being specific about the type of companies that you're actually serving, and what that means, because just saying telecoms or just saying manufacturing, it just covers an awful lot of space. But also looking at the size of the company. So is it for enterprise customers, or is it for one-man bands? What is it? And I think finally, I think and you'll be relieved to know, thinking that there is a right answer. So unfortunately, and I think this is something that kind of me as a pro, I kind of has had to get my head around quite early on, which is the perfect market sizing doesn't really exist. Even government data is extrapolated, it's based on statistics. So it's really a balancing act between the purpose of having the sizing, so what you're going to be using with it, and the time and expense that you go to generate it. And that's always a kind of a balance that you have to strike.
Yeah, sure. And I think on that final point, that's something that is a message that we try to ram home with founders in general, not just about their market sizing, but even about their their forward projections. And it's never going to be right, because there's so many different possibilities. The universe hasn't read your playbook. But if you've got good data and good planning that's backed up by credible assumptions and data behind those assumptions, then at least it shows that you know how to do that stuff and you've not just made it up.
No.
Which is often what happens. So being able to just present that and show that you're capable of that is the key thing, really, from the investor's perspective. It's not really whether it's absolutely right, it's just in the right ballpark.
And it's kind of, at least in my mind, it's the test is that that they're really asking is, do you understand the market that you're entering? And I think and the market size of it is only part of that, and there are going to be times when it's not impossible to size it, but it's going to be speculative, and I think that but as long as you understand that, they understand it, and they know what they're getting into, I think that's perfectly acceptable. So
sure. I just want to go back to a couple of things that you said. So you used a term, understanding the structures of your market. So what kinds of things would you define as the kind of structures of your market?
So I suppose if there's a distribution network that goes that's involved, if there's so if there's kind of subcontracting, if there's a different layer in which these things operate, who are you going to be selling to, who ends up going to the final customer, I suppose. So it's those parts to it, and I mean, I suppose it goes it can also be about the way the pricing's done, in terms of are there alternative ways in which people pay for things. So it's those kind of things. So it's understanding the way in which people might purchase whatever it is. So for example, if you were talking about the automotive industry and you were selling a car, you'd have to understand how it was financed, I think. So, and you'd have to understand some of the other ways in which people would actually put that car into their hands, I suppose. And that's the same with pretty much everything. So some things are very simple, and some things are a little bit more complicated because they require something else that happens before someone were to get that.
Sure.
And I suppose at extreme end, you would have kind of other structures that you would need to kind of think about. So if you're going into shipping or something like that, so there's lots of stuff that you might need to understand in terms of export and import and all those kind of things if there was that. But it's it depends on how complicated or simple, and every market is slightly different. And I spent a lot of time sizing and forecasting the IT services and the outsourcing market, and they're quite complex market structures in terms of subcontracting and those kind of things. It's really important that you understand that, but also the way in which people buy it. So those contracts can be quite complicated, so it's about the length of the deals, how they're financed, all that kind of stuff. So that becomes part of it.
Definitely. Okay, and then just going back to some other terms that you used as well. So you talked about consolidated and fragmented markets. Can you just just delve into those a little bit more?
So if you had I'm trying to think of any example. So I suppose I always think about IT, apologies, because that's the business that I'm in. So if you think about markets which have lots of competitors and markets which don't, so a fragmented market is one that has lots and lots of companies in it, and a consolidated market has one, has relatively few, and there are lots of examples across various different things that where there's that kind of that fragmentation. I think in IT consulting, for example, it's a very fragmented market. So you have a number of very big players, and again, it comes down to the structure of the market that you're needing to understand. Is that you understand that it's got quite a lot of very big multi-billion-dollar organizations, but it's also got small one-man bands that also do stuff. Whereas if you think about outsourcing or managed services, you've got a relatively small number of companies that are able to do that. And you don't have very small companies that engage in that. So, and that has
Super.
implications. So,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so digging into a couple of other things as well. So you started to talk about data sources and what data sources you use. I think this is one of the things that that startups that we engage with kind of struggle with, because they're faced by, you know, Google World and 4 million results and trying to kind of trawl through all that stuff. But are there, you know, particular databases or particular approaches to take to find sources that are, you know, credible and of more value than you know, someone's blog, for instance? Then
I mean, it's one of those ones where, because it's a kind of question that I sort of I dread slightly, because I am very familiar with the you know, all of the different places that I would get, you know, from the IT perspective. And I think, you know, I mean, because I've tended to use, so I mean, I would probably get to this a bit later. You know, I tend to use and you know, a lot of industrial market research uses you know, supply side data for market sizing. So if you're you know, if you're sizing the IT consulting market, or if you're sizing the you know, the PC market, or you're sizing the mobile phone market, you know, you're going to look at one of the primary sources is the revenue of the big providers, and obviously that data that you can get that quite publicly from various sources. So there's, you know, there's places like Seeking Alpha, there's all sorts of, you know, financial data, and also the website of those individuals. Plus, you know, particularly if they're US companies, they'll be registered with the SEC, so you'll be able to go there and do that. So it's kind of and there's lots of kind of free data available from a demographic or firmographic information. And so there's national statistics websites, so the ONS in the UK, there's Eurostat for the EU, and the US has lots of different sites that are available, you know, for that type of information. So you know, so with different parts of the government. So the Bureau of Labour has the Bureau of Labour Statistics, and you know, they publish all sorts of stuff about you know, employment, and also if you want to know how many, you know, I don't know. In fact, it doesn't have supermodels. It has fashion models. So it is one of the categories. So you can actually find out how many there are in the US and that kind of information. And there, I do use. So if I'm looking for something unusual, something I don't have, I use Statista, which is a sort of free and paid website. So there's free data and paid data on that. A good way of finding. So it can be a good way to find specific data, and it can also be a good way of finding who has that kind of data as well, because it has sourcing and all that kind of stuff. So it can be a useful kind of pointer to those kind of things. As a, you know, I mean, I use some, and I have used and do use some paid data sources. So like some databases from Bureau van Dijk and from Compass, and there are competitors of theirs as well that have that kind of, so they're good source of data. So if you want to really dig into again, going back to the structures of the market, or the industry in this case. So if you look at the industry structure for certain, you know, for certain industries, they're very good, and they have lots of lists of companies and you know, absolute numbers of different organizations, and they can help you with that side of it. And if you're doing, depends on the complexity of them. I mean, I did some very complex models, and so that kind of data is very useful in terms of so if you're sizing and using an industry basis and looking at splitting up industries by country, you know, you can get information from them, you know, with the number of organizations that are in, you know, manufacturing in, you know, in the Netherlands or wherever it is. So that can be very useful if you're taking that kind of approach to it. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think Google has made it so that I mean, the way I used to do a lot of sizing, at least collecting revenue data, was by contacting the organization themselves and asking them to complete a questionnaire, and that doesn't happen so much these days as a researcher, because people expect you to go to their website and collect the information yourself largely, and obviously you do follow up and those kind of things, but yeah, there is some kind of some legwork to be done if you're not going to use. I mean, I also use places like LexisNexis and AlphaSense, where they have and the investment banks' websites can be quite useful because they do a lot of research themselves, and that can be quite kind of a good resource for looking at specific markets. So often they're quite so they do quite a lot of stuff on, and I understand the technology space quite well because that's the one I've been focused. But they do quite a lot of stuff in that area, and I think so. If you go through some of the big investment banks, they will have quite big libraries of different stuff, and that can be quite useful. And you can see the OECD. There's all sorts of stuff that you can get. So it's kind of how long's a piece of string, really.
A lot of the big consulting firms as well, the KPMGs and the PwCs and what have you, are all good sources of those consolidated reports where they've done the legwork for you.
Exactly. and they'll pull together, so in, and I obviously, again, because of my technology bias, if you're looking at IDC or Gartner, their websites have stuff that you can get. If you look in press releases, you can see information there, so that can be quite a good and useful source if you're doing that kind of stuff. So it's, I mean, again, it can be quite useful to look at the associations that are linked to different industries. So they will often have their own market research, but they may have also aggregated stuff, which can be very useful. And that aggregated stuff is often a fast track to getting something useful. So there's lots of stuff around there. I mean, one of the other two, and again, I don't want to plug the Institute of Directors necessarily, but they have a library of all sorts of different stuff. And if you're a member, and they have a team of people that will go and help them and find data for you. So that can be quite useful. And obviously there are other business associations are also available. So that can be a very good way of getting stuff. And it's funny because if anyone who's done kind of a business degree or has done any recent kind of studying, a lot of the universities have access to lots of these kind of databases, and so they're if you're doing a kind of a course or Coursera course or something like that, you may get access to those kind of things. So that can be a quite good way of kind of checking stuff out. And they used to be, and so something I used to do quite a lot when I first started was visit. There's a business library in the City of London, and I used to go there, and they had volumes and volumes of Compass, and that could be very useful. I've very sadly gone through and listed out stuff and photocopied stuff, and so that was I mean, it's probably less useful these days, but those kind of places do still exist, and they can be very helpful, and surprisingly helpful in and there are some quite a lot of so, and I off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of it, but there is a it might be Data Monitor may have done so. It might be whoever Data Monitor were bought by. They did an awful lot of industry-specific research, and a lot of the business libraries, even local business libraries, had that stuff and had those reports, and they went into quite a lot of detail, specific detail about certain kind of sub industries within the UK, and so that was also quite a good source of those things.
Super. And I think the British Library also has you can get access there to quite a lot of things, and even local libraries also have access to some of the business databases. If you go and ask at the desk, it's not obvious, but if you go and ask at the desk, if your library's still open, that is.
And So it can be, so those kind of things can be very useful, because they can really help you to understand, who the competitors are, and those kind of things. So.
Yeah, I think the thing that kind of comes out to me from everything you've just shared is actually, before you get into trying to size your market, you need a really good plan of how you're going to attack your research, because you could just disappear down rabbit hole after rabbit hole and get completely overwhelmed by all the data. So I think the more that you can kind of set those criteria before you start, the easier it will be to just make sure you're going after the right data and not wasting lots of time.
So I mean, I did I was originally I decided to become a lawyer at one point, and so I did an LPC course, and they spent, like, we had a week's course in using libraries, and obviously legal research is quite different, but it's very applicable to this kind of work, is actually being very structured about the search terms that you're using, and it helps with Google, is if you're going to do it, is to have a plan and to follow through. So.
Super. Okay, so we've talked about existing markets, whether it's fragmented or consolidated. What about if the product or service that you're creating effectively creates a completely new market? How on earth do you go about providing data to investors when no one else is doing what you're doing? That's a bit of a a scary leap for investors in the first place. And if you can't tell them what how would you approach that if you're trying to do that kind of thing?
I mean, I suppose I always kind of question whether there's anything that's properly new. I mean, and most new markets are replacing something, so it's kind of it's looking at the market that's being replaced is probably a good place to start, and then kind of model based on assumptions that to do with what kind of capturing the share of that old space and converting it into the new, and asking about questions about the extra value that your product or service is adding in that space. So it's kind of that's kind of one approach. It's kind of I was just thinking, if a kind of Dragon's Den type of product, and you're sort of talking about I don't know, a new way of applying wallpaper paste to a wall. There's a category for that type of product that exists already, and there's even an item that's replacing or kind of sort of sitting side by side with, and there's a framework for that market. So there's people who do DIY and I don't know, professional decorators, and you can you can probably find out how many wallpaper brushes are bought annually as a starting point in there. There are lots of sources of that kind of that kind of information in terms of the existing market you could think about. And there's there's almost certainly a way of understanding and sizing the the number of decorating businesses that are out there. There's you can apply the price or the delta in price of this new product based on the old one, and you can I mean there's kind of, because I suppose although I do a lot of market sizing, I do a lot of market research, and I think there's probably understanding the whether people are prepared to kind of pay that price for that new product is probably the question that I more want to know than I suppose the market size. But you can certainly kind of establish that and I think this is probably the important thing for market size from one perspective. If you can tell people the size of the industry for decorating and decorating tools, and even if that will help there, and that demonstrate that it's a genuine market, and you can then take a look. And I think from a broader market research perspective, you can look to demand side data and examine the market potential for a genuinely new product. You can do calculations based on the price of the product or service and the expected sales, equating it to similar products or services, so looking at likely take up rates, and that can help with I suppose a data starting point. And the way I've approached kind of new, and and we do get asked, I suppose, not so much genuinely new areas, so stuff with nothing, but looking at it from something disruptive that's coming into a new disruptive technology or a new kind of category of software, and it's really kind of looking at the parallels between this and older markets and trying to find one that's similar, and then looking at how its growth is likely to pan out based on data from the past with older markets, and then take this as a similar market and explain how the life cycle of your market is, why it is like that, and and some markets are dependent on other markets. So if you're looking at kind of something that kind of an example I would use, if you're looking at the implementation services market for, I don't know, SAP software, then it's linked to the sale of SAP software. So there's other things that you can link things to, and I think that's probably, but actually I think my kind of view on this is really that the approach is to emphasize the market potential. So looking at the the structure of the market that you want to create, looking at the profile of the customers that you're targeting. So how many of those customers are there? What are they looking for? I mean, again, I'm using a Dragon's Den kind of example. If you have a kind of a product for dog owners, then it's important that you know how many dog owners there are, and how many there are in the market that you serve, and can you do research to identify what the demand is and likely take up. I don't think there's not a magic bullet, unfortunately.
No, there never is, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, the thing you describe about the disruptive element, quite often that's what we're seeing is perhaps a new piece of tech that doesn't replace another piece of tech. It replaces people quite often. So it's something that from there's previously been a manual input transfer of data type exercise going on, and there's now a new automation that takes that on. But like you say, you can look at where automation has perhaps been used previously in different areas to say, well, how did that go? That parallel view is
so I mean, in those situations, then the size of them, so ultimately the size of the market is not really important in the sense that it's zero, and from a what's there aren't really any being sold right now, and if you're creating it from nothing, then the market is kind of zero. So really it's the growth that's important, and how you model that. And there are kind of there are new and nascent markets in the technology space that we saw 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and 5 years ago, and 2 years ago, and it's kind of modeling similar products and similar kind of expectations, I suppose, on that. So I mean, funnily enough, I sized the market similar to the one that you were talking about in RPA software, and so robotic process automation software, and when that was very early on, and then it's I mean, the problem with that as a rather than as a market forecaster rather than a market sizer is there's an expectation that you'll see a hockey stick, and often you do, but it's actually trying to make that credible, and using kind of survey data is probably the best way to do that, to actually justify that growth rate.
I think that's half there's such a level of skepticism amongst investors now that as soon as they see that hockey stick graph from startups, they go, oh, another one of those. And it's how do you make them go, oh no, hang on a minute, this one is backed up on really good data that shows that actually is possible.
And often, though, I think that's really about what it is you're doing, more than so the type of product or service that you're doing. I think there is a sniff test in whether it is genuinely disruptive or not, and I think that's probably where you have to start. And that's part of that kind of the decision framework that an investor will have to make is to go, right, do I genuinely believe that this is something that will take off and will have some impact? And I think, and that's why, I think until people have started, if it's a piece of software, downloading it and using it, and you've got those kind of early indications that people are excited by it, I think, almost any kind of, and unless it's an absolute slam dunk no brainer and everyone's going, that's definitely going to be, when those are the ones probably to avoid, actually. But from an investment perspective, but but really it comes down to those initial figures, I think, that people have. I don't think there's I wouldn't start putting hockey sticks onto things until the company had started to sell it and people actually knew that it was a category that was interesting and people were starting to implement it from a software perspective anyway.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So so when startups are putting together their decks and their business plans, there's a kind of standard expectation in investment world that you'll look at your total addressable market and your serviceable available market and your serviceable obtainable markets, your TAM SAM SOM type analysis. Again, what are your kind of recommendations for how people think about what criteria that actually apply to each of those, and how they think about bringing that down from this massive number potentially at the top to, well, what makes it your addressable market versus your total available market, and what makes it an obtainable market within that? Because that's the bit you were saying earlier, that you can't pick those numbers out of the air. They've got to be backed up by assumptions and data. But what kinds of things do you think should form the criteria around each of those levels?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so you have to start with what's possible. I mean, it's where, so you have to, there are decisions that businesses have to take in terms of what from to get from the the total market, the TAM market, to the SAM market is kind of what is it, can we legitimately target? So are there things that we have to put a line through, just in terms of scope from a geographic perspective? Is there stuff that you need to put a line through from just from a practical being able to service? And it really depends on the market, frankly, of whether you're going to be able to do those kind of things. I think the excitement, I suppose, gets really when you get to the obtainable market. And I think really then it's about and I think, again, from an investor perspective, it's showing that you have a roadmap that you can demonstrate that you can kind of achieve that target, so that you're kind of you need to be able to show that that this group of people wants to or either wants to or are the core part of buying that product or service. So they're the kind of the sweet spot for it. So, and you've identified that through them. They're the people that are buying it currently, or the sort of the sort of the early adopters, and they're obviously likely to be the ones that continue doing it. And but you've also got, and it kind of, at least in my mind, it must kind of tally very strongly with your plans as a business to reach those people. So what are you doing to get into other communities? So I suppose it goes back to understanding your market, but also understanding the categories within that market and the customers that you've got, and essentially identifying though these are the three that we're targeting at the moment. Realistically, we can do that. We have kind of the capability to be able to service them effectively, and that then means that it's I suppose a realistic target to hit. So that's kind of where I kind of come from in that part. So, but I think that's the crucial one. It's that your ability to be able to demonstrate that you can, you can hit those, hit that piece. But really, it comes down to your business plan, and you're able to and your understanding of the market, and you're saying, well, hey, this is the group of people or organizations that we're targeting, and we can effectively cover these, this group or that group or these two groups, and being able to demonstrate that. So it's I suppose it's less from my mind about the numbers, or or slicing and dicing or anything like this. It's just practically, are you able to do it, and does it make sense?
Yeah,
there's scale that's involved.
I think that, I think that kind of, to me, that gives me a mental picture of kind of, you get your top level total addressable market, then you knock that down based on the things that you said. You knock things out of scope because they're not, they're not your target demographic, or they're not your product's demographic, or product's capabilities. And then that next level down is then that more practical piece where you're kind of coming up to it going, but of all of that, even how much are we actually capable of addressing? And to some extent, that can be dependent on how much money you've got available. So if you raise this much, you might be able to chase this much market, and if you raise this much, then you can chase this much market, because you've got more spending power to get out into the market and attack a wider section of that market. So I think from my experience, it can be useful to be very clear about that in your market sizing when you're explaining that to investors, that our serviceable obtainable market actually is based on us raising this amount, but if we overfund, actually the obtainable market could get bigger because we'd have more capability to address even more of that market potentially. So I think it's worth being very specific about that it's dependent on the cash as well.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to kind of some of the, I suppose, the pitfalls is that people want to see it be realistic, I suppose, and and I think the ability to scale to that market is kind of crucial to that as well. So
definitely. Okay. One last thing I wanted to just kind of go back to briefly was something that you kind of mentioned quickly near the start, was about bias in thinking, and how that might affect, even from the start, what kind of numbers you come up with, how you do your research. So I'd really just like to kind of dig into your thoughts on that for a couple of minutes.
So so I think it's not so much, well, so it can be the numbers themselves, but really it's about kind of I suppose the so when you're making assumptions is if you genuinely understand the market that you're operating in, I think you can make good, decent assumptions about it, and you're able to kind of to come out with things that are are close to that, and you don't necessarily, I mean, it's best to back it up with hard data and perhaps some research and some other bits and pieces, so that you can kind of hone in on it. But I think there are where bias creeps in is, I think it's where the antenna are a little bit off in terms of how many people are interested in this particular product, because it's been someone's baby for a long period of time. So I think there can be an element of bias in the assumption building, where you think, well, actually it's going to be 50% of people are going to be interested in this, or whatever it might be. So that's why it's important to kind of to have someone either external or someone that you trust to, is a bit more subjective, to be able to kind of at least ratify those assumptions that you're putting into the model, rather than kind of going with something that potentially is based on the fact that you're very close to what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I think the interesting thing for me thought coming out of that is really that as a founder, what you should be doing is testing your assumptions with other people, not necessarily your numbers, because they can look at your numbers and go, well, broadly they seem to make sense, but actually your assumptions underneath are the bit that you really need to test with other people to see if you've inadvertently got bias in your assumptions, and that might be throwing all your numbers out. So I think that's a valuable kind of approach.
It's one of those places where I think market research comes into it, in the sense that you are testing to see if people are kind of if your assumptions are correct often, because you can't go into a piece of frankly and do a decent job in any piece of market research where you're doing a survey without decent questions, and those questions need to be informed by the type of assumptions that you're looking to validate or to question. So it's very important that you do have assumptions, but you also need to be kind of looking to have them questioned. And I think that's where often larger organizations certainly use market research to do that, so they validate what it is and the reasons why people are buying things and stuff like that.
Super. Okay, thank you very much. It's been fantastic to kind of be able to pick your brain and get some real detail on how to approach market sizing in a credible and sensible way over the last 50 minutes. Does anyone who's attending have any questions for Jamie at this point? Let's give it a sec. I'm not at this point. Super. Well, if anyone's got any follow-up questions that they think of later, how can people get in contact with you, Jamie?
So they can email me. So you can email me at jamie_snowdon@marketprescience.com.
Super. Okay, and Jamie's also on LinkedIn.
And I'm on LinkedIn,
as well. Super. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your time this evening. If you do want to go back over any points that we've covered today, then this session will be going up on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So watch out for that one. And next week's session is going to cover finding investors, the ultimate challenge. And my guest on that fireside chat will be Ed Stevens, who is the brokerage director at the Angel Investment Network. So I'm looking forward to that session. And I hope to see some of you there. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Take care.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.